On a quiet afternoon, billionaire Eleanor Voss stepped out of her chauffeured car, clutching a bouquet of white roses, ready to honor her son's memory at his grave. But what she saw stopped her cold. A young black waitress, sobbing uncontrollably with a small child in her arms, kneeling at the same headstone. The sight was so unthinkable, so jarring, that Eleanor's world tilted. What secret tied this stranger to her son's life? Eleanor Voss had built an empire. At 62, she was the CEO of Voss Industries, a conglomerate spanning real estate, tech, and luxury goods. Her name was synonymous with power, wealth, and an unrelenting drive that had made her one of the most influential women in the world. But none of that mattered as she stood at the gates of Willow Creek Cemetery, a place that held the one wound her billions could never heal, the grave of her son, Nathan. Nathan had been gone for 3 years. A car accident, they said. A reckless turn on a rain-slicked road at 28. Eleanor had buried her only child with a grief so deep it had reshaped her. She visited his grave every month, always alone, always with the same bouquet of white roses. His favorite. The ritual was her anchor, a way to keep him close, to whisper apologies for the times she'd been too busy, too focused on her empire to see him fully. On this particular October afternoon, the air was crisp, the leaves a muted gold against the gray sky. Eleanor's driver, Charles, opened the car door and she stepped out, her tailored coat brushing the ground. She carried the roses, their scent faint but familiar, and walked the familiar path to Nathan's headstone. Her heels clicked softly on the stone walkway, the only sound in the stillness of the cemetery. She was used to solitude here, to the quiet that let her thoughts wander back to Nathan's laugh, his sharp wit, his stubborn streak that mirrored her own. But as she approached the familiar plot, something was wrong. A figure was already there, kneeling in front of Nathan's headstone. A woman, young, maybe in her late 20s, with dark skin and a cascade of braided hair spilling over her shoulders. She was crying, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to shake her entire body. In her arms was a child, no older than 3, clinging to her with small, chubby hands. The woman's clothes were simple, a worn jacket and jeans, nothing like the polished world Eleanor inhabited. The sight was so unexpected, so out of place, that Eleanor froze, her breath catching in her throat. The woman didn't notice her at first. She was too lost in her grief, her head bowed, one hand resting on the headstone as if she could will Nathan back to life. The child, a boy with wide, curious eyes, looked up at Eleanor, his gaze locking with hers. His face was streaked with tears, but there was something in his expression, something that made Eleanor's heart lurch. He looked familiar. Impossibly so. Eleanor took a step closer, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped but not unkind. "Who are you?" The woman startled, her head snapping up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face glistening with tears. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the child tightly. I'm sorry," she stammered, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I didn't know anyone else would be here." Eleanor's gaze flicked to the headstone, then back to the woman. "This is my son's grave," she said, her voice sharper now. "Why are you here?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting to the child, then back to Eleanor. I knew Nathan," she said softly. "My name is Amara. Amara Ellis." Eleanor's mind raced. Nathan had never mentioned an Amara. He'd been a private person, yes, but surely she'd have known if he'd been close to someone like this. Someone who would come to his grave, weeping as if her world had ended. And the child, who was he? The resemblance she'd glimpsed in his face gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. It was impossible. Had to be. "How did you know my son?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady but laced with suspicion. Amara swallowed hard, her arms tightening around the boy. "We worked together," she said. "At the diner. I'm a waitress there. Nathan used to come in all the time. He was kind. He was good to me." Eleanor frowned. Nathan had never mentioned working at a diner. He'd had a trust fund, a degree from Yale, a life of privilege. Why would he have been at some diner? You're mistaken, she said. Nathan didn't work at a diner. He was an executive at my company. Amara shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. No, ma'am. He didn't just visit. He worked there. Part-time under the table. He said he wanted to live a different life for a while. Away from all the pressure. The words hit Eleanor like a slap. Nathan working at a diner. Didn't make sense. He'd had everything. Opportunities, connections, a future laid out for him. Why would he throw that away to sling plates in some greasy spoon? She wanted to dismiss it, to call this woman a liar, but something in Amara's eyes, the raw pain, the certainty, made her pause. And the child? Eleanor asked, her gaze dropping to the boy. He was watching her now, his small face solemn. His eyes so like Nathan's it made her chest ache. Amara's breath hitched. She looked down at the boy, then back at Eleanor, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. This is Jaden, she said. He's my son. Eleanor's mind reeled. The pieces were starting to come together, but they didn't fit. Not yet. Why are you here at Nathan's grave? She pressed. What does my son have to do with you and your child? Amara's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she held Eleanor's gaze. Nathan was Jaden's father, she said, her voice breaking. He didn't know. I never got the chance to tell him. The world seemed to tilt under Eleanor's feet. She gripped the bouquet of roses so tightly the thorns bit into her palm, but she barely felt it. Nathan a father. It was impossible. He would have told her. He would have. But then she remembered the late nights he'd come home, the way he'd seemed distant in those final months, always brushing off her questions about where he'd been. Had he been living a life she knew nothing about? That's not possible, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. She looked at Jaden again, at the shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw. It was like seeing Nathan at that age, a memory she'd buried under years of grief. It's true, Amara said, her voice steadier now. I met Nathan 4 years ago. He came into the diner one night looking lost. Not like the rich guy everyone said he was. He was just Nathan. Talk. He kept coming back. We got close. And then she glanced at Jaden, her expression softening. Things happened. But he died before I could tell him about Jaden. Eleanor's mind was a storm of emotions. Disbelief, anger, grief, and something else she couldn't name. She wanted to walk away, to reject this woman's story outright. But the child's face, the pain in Amara's voice, it was too real. Too raw. Why didn't you come to me? Eleanor asked, her voice low. If this is true, why didn't you tell me about him? Amara's shoulders slumped. I didn't know how, she admitted. I saw you on TV, in magazines. You're Eleanor Voss. I'm just a waitress. I didn't think you'd believe me. And I didn't want anything from you. I wanted to raise my son. To give him a good life. Eleanor looked at Jaden, who was now playing with the hem of Amara's jacket, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Her heart ached for Nathan, for the life he'd never gotten to live, for the child he'd never known. And for this woman who'd carried this secret alone. Prove it, Eleanor said finally, her voice firm. If what you're saying is true, I want proof. Amara nodded, as if she'd expected this. I have letters, she said. Notes Nathan wrote me. Pictures of us together. I can show you. Eleanor's throat tightened. She didn't know if she was ready for this, for the truth to append everything she thought she knew about her son. But she couldn't walk away. Not now. Come with me, Eleanor said, gesturing toward her car. Show me everything. Amara hesitated, then nodded. She adjusted Jaden in her arms and followed Eleanor, her steps tentative but determined. The driver, Charles, raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he opened the car door for them. As they drove to Eleanor's estate, the silence was heavy, broken only by Jaden's soft humming. Eleanor stared out the window, her mind racing. If this was true, if Jaden was Nathan's son, it changed everything. Her empire, her legacy, her grief. She'd spent 3 years mourning a son she thought she knew, but now she wondered if she'd ever truly known him at all. At the estate, Amara pulled a small worn backpack from her shoulder and began laying out her proof on Eleanor's polished mahogany table. Letters in Nathan's unmistakable handwriting, filled with warmth and humor. Photos of him and Amara laughing in a diner booth. His arms slung casually around her shoulders. A selfie of them at a park, Nathan's smile brighter than Eleanor had seen in years. Each piece was a dagger to Eleanor's heart, but also a lifeline. Nathan had been happy. He'd loved someone. He'd left something behind. "This doesn't make sense," Eleanor said, her voice trembling as she held a photo of Nathan and Amara. "Why didn't he tell me?" Amara's eyes softened. "He said he wasn't ready," she said. "He loved you, but he felt trapped, I guess, by the expectations, the company. He wanted to find himself, to live on his own terms for a while. The diner was his escape." Eleanor's chest tightened. She'd pushed Nathan, hadn't she? Pushed him to be the heir she needed, the son who could carry her legacy. Had she driven him to hide this part of his life? The guilt was a weight she hadn't expected. "And Jaden?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Amara looked at her son, who was now curled up on a nearby couch, asleep. "He's a good kid," she said. "Smart like his dad. Stubborn too. I've been doing my best, but it's hard. I work 2 jobs, and the diner doesn't pay much. I want him to have a chance." Eleanor studied Amara, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the strength it must have taken to raise a child alone. She thought of her own life, the endless meetings, the sterile luxury of her world. She'd built so much, but what had it cost her? Nathan's happiness. His trust. "I need time," Eleanor said finally, "to process this. But if Jaden is my grandson, I want to know him. I want to help." Amara's eyes widened, a mix of hope and fear. "I don't want your money," she said quickly. I wanted him to know where he came from. To know Nathan's family." Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She looked at Jaden, sleeping peacefully, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a flicker of purpose beyond her grief. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor and Amara met again. DNA tests confirmed what Eleanor's heart already knew. Jaden was Nathan's son, her grandson. The revelation was both a wound and a gift, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd gained. She began spending time with Jaden, marveling at his curiosity, his laughter, the way he carried pieces of Nathan in every gesture. Amara was cautious at first, protective of her son, but Eleanor's persistence wore her down. They talked not just about Nathan, but about Amara's life, her struggles, her dreams. Eleanor found herself admiring this woman who'd faced so much with so little. She offered to pay for Jaden's preschool, to set up a trust fund, but Amara insisted on boundaries. "I want him to know you," she said, "but I want him to know me too. I'm his mom." Eleanor respected that. She'd spent her life controlling everything, but this was different. This was family. Real messy, complicated family. One evening, as Eleanor watched Jaden play in her garden, chasing fireflies under the fading light, she felt Nathan's presence. Not in the way she'd felt him at his grave, heavy with loss, but lighter, warmer. Like he was watching too. She'd built an empire, but this, Jaden's laughter, Amara's quiet strength, was something greater. Eleanor didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could ever fully bridge the gap between her world and Amara's, or if she could make up for the years she'd missed with Nathan. But for the first time in a long time she felt hope. And as she looked at Jaden, she knew one thing for certain. She'd do whatever it took to be part of his life.